Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our chats with Emily, as we're calling our readings through the 1,775 poems of Emily Dickinson contained within the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem number 52, Whether My Bark Went Down at Sea. Here, much like in poems 4 and 30, we'll see possibly, I think, the soul is being represented as a ship or a bark. Talking about the idea of the day one dies and then what happens the day after one dies. Like the question of immortality, and we've commented on this already, that Emily's very interested in this question. She's curious, of course, about the question of afterlife. Is there nothingness or is there heaven? And to what degree is that a possibility of what's going on here? There are, however, some scholars who have seen this as possibly another Sue poem. That is to say, Susan Gilbert, Emily's close pal, as well as, of course, sister-in-law. In June of '52, she wrote this to Sue. She said, quote, "I shall only hope, my Susie, and that trimmingly, for haven't barks the fullest stranded up on the shore," end quote. It's also possible that this this poem is in many ways like poem 441, "This is my letter to the world who never wrote to me, judge tenderly of me," and all of that. In other words, a question regarding the interpretation and reception of her poetry. This poem can be read in different ways. Most have read it as, however, a continued search into the question of immortality. She says this, "Whether my bark went down at sea, whether she met with gales, whether to isles enchanted she bent her docile sails, by what mystic mooring she is held today, this is the errand of the eye, out upon the bay." Now, when we get to poem 1234, we're going to hear it this way. "If my bark sink, 'tis to another sea, mortality's ground floor is immortality." So this idea that the ship is sailing, the ship sinks, and that's her representation of death. This is not an unusual kind of representation. And you'll remember in poem 30, she said, "Adrift, a little boat adrift." So we're playing a very similar game. Notice, the question is her soul. Did it meet with gales, and that's what led to her death? And has it sailed to isles enchanted? And then, of course, the idea of the docile sails. When we hit poem 1396, she laid her docile crescent down. We'll hear this use of this docile sails. In other words, the question is, what is it that ultimately would lead to the death itself? And then she'll continue in the second stanza. By what mystic mooring, you'll remember Mystic Green of poem 24, right? By what mystic mooring is she held today? Of course, our assumptions here that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist, and that you've already been exposed to intro poems as well as up through the last 51 poems, which we just finished. And you'll remember that in a number of those poems, she's always playing this game of what exactly is death like? How do I understand it? And notice, by what mystic mooring, this use of the word mystic is central to reading Emily's work, she is held today. In other words, is it heaven that the soul is going to? And then she'll say, this musing about what happens after death, this is the errand of the eye. Now in poem 95, when we get there, we'll hear this use of the word errand, as in they bear no other errand and I no other prayer. This is, if you will, the challenge. Some have called it the job, the chore, the work that has to be done, is one speculates on death. This is the errand of the eye out upon the bay. You'll remember in poem 43, it was never sailed the bay. The idea of looking out and seeing the tranquil bay versus maybe not so tranquil bay, her word docile. What exactly are we going to do with a poem like this at 2A? Well, it isn't really clear, Emily suggests, exactly what happens after death to the soul, but this remains the eternal question, the curious question, and it's one that Emily obviously loves to play with. At 2B, obviously the word picture of the soul is a boat. which takes us, as we already read, to poem 1234. But also, remember Tennyson's Crossing the Bar. We've given a full lecture of it at learnstrong.net, where sailing is understood. You'll also remember Yeats's Sailing to Byzantium. That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, and therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. This idea that death is like a sailing or a departure, which of course takes us to Plato's Phaedo, right? Socrates getting ready to drink his hemlock, and then is thinking about the journey. Finally, at 3b, how are we going to own a little poem like this? Well, what do you think does happen after death, and to what degree are you interested in speculating at all on this? Emily will certainly challenge us to play that game for sure. Thank you.